Dzień dobry Państwu, dzień dobry, dobry wieczór, kiedy Państwo oglądacie. Witam Państwa na kolejnej projekcji, a właściwie kolejnym spotkaniu krakowskiego festiwalu, 61. Krakowskiego Festiwalu Filmowego. Niektórzy z Państwa są w pięknych krakowskich kinach, inni jeszcze trochę trwają w pandemicznym osłupieniu, trochę tak jak ja, a inni jeszcze mają problemy z podróżowaniem, no bo właśnie, bo jeszcze są wciąż ograniczenia, jeszcze wciąż kwarantanny, ale bardzo się cieszę, że jest z nami online Mark Isaacs. Hello, Mark. I've just said that I'm very glad that you're with us, and I said that there are still some limitations in traveling, but I'm very glad that you are at least virtually with us.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
And Mark Isaacs is a director of film titled in Polish w domu reżysera, the Directors House. And I'm wondering, I mean, first of all, I know that you get this question quite frequently, but especially when you read the title and when you start reading that everything happens indoors, everyone probably thinks that that's one of the COVID projects, and it's absolutely untrue.
Yeah, no, I started actually filming 1 year before COVID. And the reason I decided to set the film in my house was both kind of creative and practical in many ways. After some years of making lots of films that were always funded by usually BBC, this kind of system became more difficult for me because the kind of films they were interested in giving money to didn't interest me. So I started to think like another way about filmmaking, not so much about filmmaking, but about how to keep independence, because even though my films are always funded by broadcasters, I'd always had like complete freedom, I would say, to make the films I want to make. So that's been the most important thing to me. So, with this film, which I made for very little money, these kind of pragmatic restrictions or limitations actually kind of produce for me what were quite interesting creative decisions. I knew from the beginning that I needed to make a film that I could finish, so I wasn't going to fly off to India or something. So it informed my whole thinking about how I was going to make a new film. And then I started to think about people. All my films are really with ordinary people, you could say. Like they're not celebrities, they're not pop stars, they're not very, very ordinary people.
Sorry to interrupt you, but aren't serial killers normal people?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the question of your producer, but asking if I ask you.
Yeah. You mean like this idea of like normal people,
I mean, but this is very true that for quite a long time now, it seems to me that I'm still watching films or documentary series about serial killers, and exactly as your producer mentioned, crime, death, and serial killers. How do you think? Why? Is it a fascination of, I don't know, how the society corrupts, or?
Yeah, I think that it's like, there's this sort of, there's a real, I think with non-fiction film, like it was always really about, it was a place where in a way, like everyday people stories could be told, I mean, from the very beginnings. I mean, there's been different sort of periods of fascination. So you have in the early days of non-fiction cinema, filmmakers running off to film, Inuit people in Alaska, or then there's been sort of interest, much later on in celebrities, and then there's all these kind of biographies of sportsmen or pop stars, and there was a period, especially in this country, and also, I know quite a bit about Polish documentaries from the past. There was a period where films about, let's say, ordinary, normal people were very prevalent. And some extraordinary films made, you know, here in your country, all over the place, you know. And with society's like obsession with celebrity, which is, you know, it's been reflected in films, you know, and because broadcasting has become so much about so commercial and much less kind of interested in sort of culture, you know, that's kind of normal, you know, sadly.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say, that especially as speaking to someone from Great Britain, country with such an incredible tradition of portraying, well, ordinary people. I mean, very different traditions. It's not only Kitchen Sink, it's not only Ken Loach, it's exactly, you mentioned BBC, which had incredible era, all the Wednesday plays. And now we're speaking about both fiction and non-fiction, and how they mix sometimes, like in BBC or Channel 4.
Absolutely.
What's happened? I mean,
it's funny you mention that, because I just literally, like, I'm starting to do some research for my next project. I'm watching some of those old Wednesday plays and Play for Today. You know, they're just incredible, genuine explorations, you know. And, you know, what's happened is that the broadcast companies have become corporate. You know, they've become all about the money. You know, if you produce an idea or pitch an idea to the BBC, if they can't see that, you know, so many people are going to watch it, that determines their thinking. It's nothing to do with kind of critical, you know, they don't even care now. Like there's a new director of the BBC, and one of the first things he said a couple of weeks ago was that we're not interested in films that will be critically well received. It's just about how many people will watch them, you know. So it's like a kind of race to the bottom, you know. And it's sad.
Working media, you're right. I mean,
you know, it's like it infects like the whole society is like that, you know, in many ways. And you know, at the same time, there's a reaction against it. But the problem is there's very, very little cultural money in this country. For the whole of the UK, like there's probably like £1 million for documentaries, you know, for the whole of the UK, more or less, from the British Film Institute. And most of their films, like they get really obsessed with campaign films, you know. Personally speaking, most campaign films I see don't really interest me, because they're like, they're not very kind of suitable for me, like in the way that I think about cinema, you know. They have an important message to communicate, but often I feel like that would be better done in a piece of writing or something, you know. So the medium has changed completely, you know. So for people like myself who have, you know, my main interest is just these ordinary people, let's say, you know, everyday life, you know, it's really difficult to kind of find a space.
It's not only difficult in terms of budget and the media reality, but it's also difficult because you have to have quite incredible sense of observation, because the same in this film, but also in your most of previous film you portrayed, I don't know, inhabitants of small seaside town, but mostly people you met from your neighborhood on the streets of London. So you just well, walking around your neighborhood and observing.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like what's also really important is that when I get interested in the initial idea of a film, what really interests me is like, it comes from like, you know, my own life very much. So like, what is it really that's kind of, what am I connecting with, you know? And the films change over time because I change, but I think what doesn't change is the kind of, these people, you know, these everyday people being at the center of what I'm doing, you know. And in a way, I just look for new forms to express human problems all the time, you know. And this latest film took a very different form because I got a bit bored of, you know, what I've been doing previously. You know, I wanted to, you know, I think there comes a time after 20 years of doing something in a similar way, you know, I wanted to sort of, you know, update myself in some way, you know, to feel alive, to wake myself up a bit, you know. And
the convention of nonfiction also, because you play quite, I mean, you play very wit game with the viewer, I would say, because you start like a regular, there's no such a thing as regular documentary, but of course, but as traditional documentary, and suddenly the viewer can feel that something is there. I mean, they speak about hospitality too much, that somehow it may be staged, and then you break the curtain. I'm wondering then, how much truth is there? Because also I read that the characters, they are very close to themselves.
Yeah, I mean, all these, you know, I can break some of the mystery of the film in this conversation. In that, you know, what worked for me was that, like, I was bringing out the, you know, certain aspects of these characters' lives as they are, you know, like in reality, let's say, you know. I always have a problem with this thinking, because as soon as you start to make a film, you're also creating another kind of reality. So even though this film is layered, but yeah, I mean, it's true that my neighbor is really my neighbor, and you know, she even comes with food like this when I'm not filming, you know, and her problems that she talks about are real problems, and the same with the builder character who comes to repair the fence was actually somebody I started filming in a previous film that never really got completed. You know, and he's a man that's sort of a Londoner that's now moved away because he's sort of fed up with the multiculturalism of the city and feels like the world that he liked is no longer, you know, he wants to kind of reinvent or like escape it somehow. And the homeless guy from Slovakia is really a homeless guy who I've known for some years. He wanders around and talks to people, and the same as the cleaner from Colombia. She's our childminder actually, but she started off as a cleaner that, you know, so I've known her for years, and she really did lose her mother in this way, but it was 2 years before, or even longer, 3 years before the film, you know. So I played around with like, you know, these real stories and tried to put them in another frame, because I thought that these stories were really interesting, you know, as character studies, and then thinking about, of course, how they come together.
Also with their, for example, views, the characters, or you were just playing somewhere between the real characters and also a bit stereotypes. I'm not saying in a negative way, but yes, I mean,
I think that stereotypes are really interesting because they're kind of true to the sense, you know, like, I mean, a stereotype is a stereotype. So when you see, you know, a builder, you know, who's like a bit fat or whatever and looks a bit tough, you know, you're going to have all these preconceptions, you know, and I think it's really interesting to play around with that, to like, because that's what you're presented with. And, you know, so I'm also playing around with your preconceptions of this character and the vowed Muslim woman, you know, at the same time. And I've sort of always done that in my films, in that I think that, you know, when a character pops up in a film, naturally everybody will make assumptions, but by the end of the film, you can turn things around in a really interesting way, you know. And I've always thought that was interesting in a film, because, you know, underneath the stereotypes, of course, that the point is that you find people with the same struggles as you and I, dealing with all the stuff we have to deal with in life. You know, sometimes different people have, of course, different experiences of these universal human problems, you know, but we all have them, and just to lesser or greater degrees, you know. And that's kind of why I make films, because it's a way for me to talk and explore these feelings in, you know, that I have through other people, you know.
Well, the universal feelings, emotions, empathy, yes, but also quite real social problems, because I feel that this convention, this this closed set, it's really your house, by the way.
It's my house, yeah. I mean, like some of the scenes are shot here where I am now. Yeah.
So this closed set of your house also creates a dialogue. I mean, honestly, I wanted to ask you, what is this Filmmaker House? Because I think it's not only set, but also kind of the meeting place, the space also, because it's so condensed, the space of, very intense dialogue between people who not necessarily would be in such a situation usually.
Yeah, I think one of the questions I was interested in is, like, you know, where I live in London, you know, I come out of my front door and within seconds you encounter people from literally all over the world. You know, if I was to actually create a list, it'd be quite amazing, you know, like just having to walk 20 meters, you know. And this is really interesting because usually on a day-to-day level, you just kind of walk past each other, hello or not hello, you know, and life goes on like that. And in this film, I was kind of asking myself a question like, well, what if people encounter each other and are forced together, you know? And it's really interesting because it's, you know, of course, all that awkwardness and difference is both very humorous and revealing of one's relationship to the other, you know, which is again a very human thing. You know, we exist in relation to other people, and it informs our own perception of ourselves. And so I was playing around with and exploring those questions, and you know, it's like a kind of people talk very easily about, oh, if only we could live together in peace, and you know, and I don't know, we create a kind of multicultural society, and that's the mission, you know, and that's the aim, and all that's kind of well and good. But there's so many, you know, gaps in between all of that, you know, when you put people together, and that's fascinating as a filmmaker to look at, like, well, how can a religious Muslim woman live with a, you know, live with a builder, and all those questions, you know, or a homeless, you know, how can a cleaner relate to a homeless guy, you know, and myself as the filmmaker, I mean, that's what we do. We enter into these people's lives, and we, you know, we kind of live with them for a little while. They live in our camera, you know, and I think that in this film, they don't only come into my house, they come into my camera. And I was really interested in exploring what that means as well, you know, and that theme of hospitality that comes up, you know, is fascinating for that, because it requires any sort of act of hospitality, requires genuine hospitality, requires some risk, you know, and the risk is interesting, like inviting all these people into the house, and you know, these awkward exchanges. It feels you know, unsafe in a way, you know, I don't mean like literally unsafe, but it feels interesting in a film because it's never settles, you know, it's kind of.
That's true, especially in such a society, which I believe still is very class society. Did you also have this in mind that, well, you're the film director who, well, creates all this situation, but all the other people are from, well, or working class, or even more difficult situation as the home.
You know what I thought about a lot was the hierarchy, you know, like, so I'm the filmmaker, the privileged white man filmmaker, you know, in my house, you know, then we have like the builder, who's like this English guy who feels like he really, you know, has a place here because he's kind of tribal and quite nationalistic, you know, and then we have the cleaner, you know, who's employed by myself. So she's an employee. It's a very particular kind of relationship. And the neighbor, you know, who also is completely from outside and came over here as an arranged marriage from Pakistan. And the homeless guy who has, you know, he's not only a homeless, but he's also an immigrant, you know. And I was very aware of that hierarchy, and also to explore that in the film, you know, because the relationship one has with the cleaner, for example, if you employ a cleaner, it's a really fascinating relationship. They come into your house, they also own your house for those few hours, you know, they tell you to move out whilst they're cleaning, and, you know, and usually, you know, these people, you just pay cash, but there's an obligation you have. You become really close to these people. They tell you about their lives. You know, we have a new cleaner at the moment, and just yesterday she was crying in our kitchen because she has some personal problems going on, you know, and it's, you know, and this is somebody you've just employed to clean your house, you know, and all of this comes out. So I was very aware of the hierarchy and wanted that to be in the film. So rather than to hide that, for it to be really present in the frame, you know.
Hierarchy, and how many there are signs of those different positions, because even in language, in accents, the accent of this British guy is quite incredible. You know, for some, I mean, it's and also a bit of small funny things there, because you know, the whole case with the sandwich, or with those small things which are even, and finally with your partner or significant other saying, I want my home back.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that like humor for me is really important because, you know, one of the great things about living with so many different kinds of people, you know, or maybe with anybody as well. Like for me, humor is really important. Not as an easy laugh to mask how you're really feeling, but you know, as a way to really have genuine kind of contact with people, and to also, but in my own life, to, you know, when things are really bad, you know, it's important to feel when things aren't going well and to live with that, and it's also important, I think, to have a distance, you know, and to sometimes life is so ridiculous and painful. Like the only solution is to, you know, to find humor. And I think the humor is really present in these situations a lot. I see it all around me all the time. You know, the misunderstandings and the it's a really useful way of like forming a bridge with other people. You know, it's really, for me anyway. I think it comes from my family background. That I grew up in a sort of Jewish family, and you know, like they talk to each other in a really direct way, and you know, and they weren't really aware they're being funny, but it is really funny. You know, it's like it's kind of ridiculous sometimes. Everyone's shouting at each other, nobody can hear anything, and you know, it's very much inside me. You know, and I kind of look for that in characters and in scenes. You know, to bring that out. I think it's and it for me it works best when it's both sad and funny at the same time. You know, like when it's kind of tragic comedy. You know?
I mean, that's, for example, what always Ken Loach has been saying, that in his films, even those harshest and well, portraying tragic characters and telling tragic stories, that it's always important for him to have a scene in a pub when people are joking or making just stupid jokes one to each other, because this is how you cope with this sometimes very harsh reality.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think as a film, you know, there are some filmmakers that really will push their audience into a desperate, tragic world, and there's no kind of light, you know. And I don't really want to. I certainly don't want to depress my audience. You know, I want them to experience the kind of, you know, the light and the dark, you know, and for them to, even in desperate situations or difficult situations, for them, because they're, you know, they're really full of life, these situations. That's kind of where you see the human spirit as well, you know.
Also, although sometimes it's easy now to think that, because I was thinking about, for example, you made in 2013 the film, The Story of Life and Death, and you were always portraying immigrants and their situation, identity, but during those 7-8 years, so many has changed. I mean, Brexit, obviously the biggest things, Brexit and pandemic. So I'm wondering, how was it interesting to you to compare those moments?
Well, you know, Brexit was really like, this project was really informed by that, you know, because the working title was called March the 29th, and it was all going to be on the day that we left the European Union. And that was just like a kind of social political context that was going on in my mind. And in my mind, the house was like the country, you know, and people coming into my house was them coming into the country. And that's sort of what was going on in my head. You know, and yeah, Brexit was extremely depressing and a real shock to wake up that morning thinking, my God, people have really voted for this, you know, what is going on? Yet, on the other hand, I really understand, like, I've seen that coming since probably more than 10 years. You know, you could feel we were going in that direction. So it was both a shock when it happened, but also in some other way completely predictable, you know, which is really sad. And a failure, you know, it's a failure of our society that, you know, this and something that politicians have been really good at exploiting, of course, you know. But for me, it's very much like an economic issue, in that people that have started to turn to the right, like in America, feel completely left apart from the sort of global world that perhaps you and I benefit from, you know. And I can understand that, you know, I can understand it. And the Labour Party have completely neglected those people as well, you know. But it's very sad, and we're still there, you know, we're still in the middle of all of that. And the pandemic, you know, on the one level, I can feel a kind of gentleness in people sometimes because of this situation. There's definitely a lot of empathy around, and you know, there's a respect I can feel like when I'm out and about between people, and you know, but if there was another election tomorrow, I still think they would vote for Boris Johnson again, you know, even though
somehow the pandemic now is what I wanted to ask about, because you made a film about hospitality, and I'm wondering, because I remember the beginnings of, I mean, we all remember the beginnings of epidemic, and there was this, I would say, at least that's my observation, that there was a huge wave of solidarity, of, as you said, respect, but also respect for essential workers, because we noticed that they are essential, and they are brave in the way they well, did their jobs on at the beginning. But I feel that with the time, it all has disappeared, and suddenly, especially with the economic crisis, we somehow
it's unbelievable. It feels like I really don't know what will happen, what events will lead to some lasting change. It's like it's really hard to predict. I mean, you know, younger people are they're so active, like, you know, in a way that my generation wasn't. I don't think, you know, my daughter's at school, and she goes to a girls' school, and all the girls were sort of marching Free Palestine the other day, you know, and putting posters in the school. You know, it was, even if they didn't understand at 12 years old, they're kind of quite active, and you know, maybe it's going to be another few years before things start to kind of shift. But yeah, it's, in a way, it's really sad that you kind of can't really see where the change is going to come from, you know.
That's true. That in Poland also there were at the end of last year huge manifestations, and there were loads of young people there, fighting for reproductive laws and against the abortion ban, the most strict, one of the most strict abortion ban in Europe. And that's true, that was the difference, that suddenly those young people from middle schools, they protested, shouted, exactly, having sometimes funny, witty signs, and that was incredible.
Yeah, I think that it is interesting what's going on. I think, you know, what's different from when I was growing up is the lack of, or the imaginative lack of an alternative. You know, it feels like there's no other ideas, you know. Big ideas that, and that's, I think that's the same everywhere. And really, it's you know, I mean, Jeremy Corbyn's failure was massive. You know, it was like unbelievable. You know, and you'd have to be crazy to vote for somebody like him because he's never going to get elected. You know, so what's the point? You have to like come into the middle ground and then maybe try and go a bit further. You know, but
looking for some hope, I must say that watching your film, I thought it's also a tale about cinema, which is about the director. I mean, you, for whom cinema is important, for whom cinema is also the way of connecting people, of being, in a way, well, in the most simple ways, being good to each other.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that for me, it's like without being sentimental in my films, it's really important to, you know, to show that humanity, and it's a really powerful tool to move people. You know, I mean, I don't make campaign films. I don't think films can change the world, but if you watch films where you're moved, you know, these films live in your mind, and they can be really powerful. You know, and I think that that's you know, one of the things that you can do through cinema, which is, that's the essence of it for me. You know?
That's what you tell the cleaner, that sometimes non-fiction cinema, or just not, it's not about cinema, but maybe more about camera, and it can be helpful in difficult situations.
Right. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, it's really fascinating, you know, like who wants to be in your film, you know, when you know, why would somebody want to do it? And that kind of, you know, I walk past Mikkel, the homeless guy, all the time, and you know, his life, he's got an apartment now, and but his life is pretty much the same. You know, he's still walking around the streets, even though he has an apartment. But at the same time, for that time that we made the film, right, it was a really, you know, it was really something different for him, and you know, it was a very positive experience. It was funny, the other day I met a character from a film of mine from 2008, and there's a scene in that film where she has a barbecue with her. She's an English woman who has a barbecue with her Albanian neighbors, and it was something that I kind of set in motion in the film itself. And she told me when I saw her that every year they've been having this barbecue. I had no idea, and that's quite interesting. I was very cynical about it, thinking, oh, they would never speak to each other again. It was just for the film, but actually they made a real friendship. Which is,
It's great because it's also a touching moment of your film. Difficult when you're asked by the homeless person if he can stay at your place, and it's so difficult because, well, it's obvious that you can't help everyone, but also refusing help and hospitality is difficult.
Yeah. I thought that was. I didn't want the ending to be sentimental. I didn't want to say she can stay, and partly because I think it would be. I mean, if someone stayed for 1 or 2 nights, it's not a problem. But actually, to take in somebody and be responsible for them, I wouldn't feel like I could do that. That's a really complex area, but interesting as well. That's the complexity is what makes these things interesting.
So just ending, I'm wondering, because that's the Krakow Film Festival, is documentary film festival, and also short films. But because can you believe? That's question, because especially after your first conversation with the producer and after how you treat people, do you believe that there can be documentary cinema without some kind of, goodness, something very noble? Some kind of...
Are you saying to me that... Sorry, ask the question again. Didn't quite catch.
Some people treat films, both fiction and non-fiction, just as, a lot of tricks, knowledge about how to tell the stories. But it feels to me that that for you, it doesn't exist without something very noble, without some kind of goodness and kindness to other people.
Yeah, I think that's why I do it. I mean, there's plenty of people that make films because they love to be on stage and and get an award, and like the idea of being a director or filmmaker. And I think now more than ever, because people can afford to pick up their phones or a camera and make something. There's so many films like that where you feel there's no heart in it at all. They'll always be there as well. But I think there's a lot of filmmakers that really care about what they're doing and have good intentions. But there's also just as many that just make product. That terrible word,
That's true, especially in terms of art. So I hope
I'm not a great fan of if you go onto Netflix and flick through the documentaries there, it's endless rubbish. It's just like unbelievable, like another biography of a sports person, or it's just endless kind of, and badly made for badly crafted films. That's the other thing. Like the craft is often, in the mainstream can be really neglected, but where you find craft and form at its finest is in film festivals, like Krakow,
So I'm glad. I hope I can say it in past tense that the festivals have survived, that we all have survived, and let's keep a little bit of hope. And thank you so much.
You're welcome. Great talking to you, Crystal.
Great talking to you. Thank you.